What's up, guys? Your agent Tyler Wehrung with Keller Williams, and today we're going to talk about earnest money. What the heck is it? Why is it important? The timing, how much, and more. So with that, let's jump in. Alright guys, so real estate, unlike other transactions, is typically sold at a higher dollar amount. There's typically a longer due diligence period, so it's not like buying a car where you just show up one day, sign the dotted line, and you leave off in your new car. With real estate, you have to submit an offer. That offer has to be accepted, and then you go into what's called a due diligence period where things like inspections, appraisals, bank approval, things like that have to happen. And so after a house is under contract, there's some time in between where both parties kind of have to renegotiate some additional things in order for the contract to close. Now, if there wasn't something called earnest money, a buyer could essentially go out and get 10 houses under contract, and throughout those additional negotiations, decide which house they want best and leave the other 9 in a bind. Because when an offer is accepted, for all intents and purposes, it takes that house off the market. It does go into a pending status, but that seller is no longer receiving additional offers, and they're assuming that they are going to close. So earnest money is something that the buyer provides as a good faith, kind of a goodwill intent that they do intend to close. It is often referred to as a good faith deposit, and it's really just showing the seller that you are serious, you have skin in the game, and you are planning to close this deal. Alright, so how much money are we talking here? Well, this is a classic answer of it depends. It depends on your risk tolerance and how much money you have available and are willing to put on the line. It depends on the market, what's typical in that market. Really, you want to have a good conversation with your agent on what they feel is strong and what's typical for that market. Some guidelines that we typically try to tell people is don't go below 500. 500 should be your minimum. I mean, after all, you are trying to convince the seller that you're serious. You're trying to entice them into potentially choosing you. And so $500 today really doesn't do a whole lot. We often hear other folks say, between 1% and 3% of the purchase price, kind of depending. But again, there's no really hard and fast rules around what you can offer in terms of earnest money. We've seen as little as $500 and up into tens of thousands of dollars. So it's really dependent, and you want to have a good conversation with your agent on what they feel is strong and what you feel comfortable with. All right, let's talk about timing. When should you expect to pay this money? All right, so this money, really you should have it in a liquid form when you make your offer on the home. Your real estate agent can give you a better answer on exactly when he's going to be looking for that check, but it's typically between 24 and 48 hours from the acceptance of the offer. What that really means is you need to have it available and liquid. Don't write down that you're going to put $5,000 down in earnest money, but you need to sell a car first. No, that needs to be in a liquid account that you can write checks from, you can wire money to, or you can get a money order on. All right, so where does this money go? You hand your real estate agent a fat check. How do you know he's not taking his family out to dinner? No, so you'll make this check out to likely the brokerage of your real estate agent. It could go to a title company. Your contract will give you specifics on who will hold the earnest money, but just have a good conversation with your agent. Ask him where the money will be held, and it will go likely to a brokerage account where it will sit until you close the deal or it gets dispersed back to you. All right, so let's talk about how you get this money back. First, I'll use the typical example, the example that we see 99% of the time, and the example that you likely hope happens to you. So when you give your earnest money deposit, it sits in an account until closing day, and then you will get a credit at closing for that amount that you gave forward. For example, if you put down $1,000 in earnest money when you very first wrote your offer, and then you plan to put 10% down on a $100,000 house, you would have had to put down $10,000 on closing day. You'll get a credit for that first $1,000 that you put down. So then you would only have to bring that other $9,000 to closing to fulfill the full $10,000. So your closing agent will kind of go through all this with you and line by line what everything accounts for. But the important thing to know is you will get a credit at closing for the money that you put down early on. All right, so let's talk about an example where things don't go as planned. You put down $1,000 earnest money and the house didn't close because of several reasons. Something failed on inspection that the seller refused to fix. You weren't able to get financing. So what happens to the earnest money in that situation? So hopefully you put some good contingencies in your contract. If there was a contingency in place that said, this house, this offer is contingent on a successful inspection. This offer is contingent on me being able to be fully approved by a bank, not a pre-approval, but fully approved and clear to close. Then if you had these contingencies in place, you're likely okay. And if you fell out for those specific reasons that you had contingencies for, you'll likely get that earnest money back. Now, if you decide to back out for another reason, you just got cold feet, you no longer want to do the deal, you're likely not going to get that back. You're kind of risking that money in the beginning and telling the buyer that you're making this in good faith. You do intend to close. So if you change your mind, that's the bad news, that you probably won't get that money back. It will likely go to the seller. And in the rare situation when you and the seller can't agree on how to disperse the earnest money, unfortunately, you will have to get a court order for that broker or that title company to release the funds back to you. This could be upwards of 2-year process. We very rarely see this happen. Most times we're able to come to some kind of mutually beneficial agreement to both parties and able to get you guys that money back. But just know that that risk is out there, that once you put that earnest money in, you are agreeing to close, and if you don't or you decide to go a different direction, that money is at risk for being lost. Alright guys, so I hope that gives you a better idea of what earnest money is, why it's important, the timing, and what you should expect when you're putting in an offer. And if you have any other questions, drop them in the comments below. Also, I'd be very interested to know what you paid in earnest money on your last house. If you did, drop it in the comments below so we can kind of get an idea of what the listeners out there are paying in earnest money. If this video was helpful at all, I would love a share, a like, or subscribe on it. I'd be eternally grateful. With that, we'll catch you next time. I'm Tyler with Taylor Williams.